I chose as my topic this morning this idea of God's plan for you. And I did that primarily because I know that most of us practitioners and ministers get this question all the time when we're doing prayer work for people. Well, what is God's will for me? What is God's plan for me? What am I supposed to be doing? Where am I going? This is probably one of the most common questions that we get. So I'd like to share a few ideas with you this morning about this topic. And I'm going to do it by telling you 3 stories. Somebody said, excellent, good. And hopefully these stories will illustrate what this topic implies. Well, the first story is about the little boy who comes to church every Sunday, and he sees at the entrance to the church a plaque, and it says, "For those who died in the service." And you've probably seen those before. It has a listing of all of the people. And he wondered what that meant, so he asked his parents, and his parents didn't quite know, and they said, well, you should talk to the minister. So he went to the minister, and he said, "Reverend, what does that plaque mean for those who died in the service?" And the minister kind of smiled and looked at him, and he said, "Well, what do you think it means?" And he said, "Well, I wondered if it was the 9 o'clock service or the 11 o'clock service." Now, that's just a hint. So everybody's got to stay alive here. But the point of this story is really more than just the humor in it. It's that if we have questions about issues, about things that are going on in our life, any spiritual things that are happening, we need to get help. We need to ask questions. We need to ask what those things mean. And we have a great tool in this teaching, a tool which all of us come to appreciate more and more as the time goes on, and that is practitioners. People who have spent hours, thousands of hours, in study and prayer, and they are available to all of us to help us with these areas that are difficult. So if things come up for you, use these people. Use these practitioners. Go to them. Bring these issues up to them. Don't be like the little boy that just takes the words for granted. Okay, the second story is a story from the Bible. Probably no surprise to a lot of you that I would pick a Bible story. And this is the story of Joseph. Now, many of you may know that story because several years ago they produced a Broadway play called Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is kind of a summary of that story. And that's what I'm going to tell you, a summary, because the story goes on for quite a few chapters in the book of Genesis. But the story illustrates a great principle, and I want us all to understand that this morning. Joseph was the youngest son of Jacob, and he was the son of Jacob and his favorite wife, Rachel. And Rachel, it took quite a number of years before she had Joseph. And during this time, many other sons were born, 10 other sons. They all grew to maturity before Joseph was born. So when Joseph was born, he became the apple of his father's eye. He was the chosen one, so to speak. And of course, as you would suspect, this didn't sit well with the older brothers. They didn't like that very much, especially when Joseph began to have dreams and thoughts about how he was greater than they were, and his sheave in the field would stand up and their sheaves would fall down. They got pretty upset about this, pretty mad. And this came to a climax when the father, Jacob, presented Joseph with a special garment. Now, different translators translate this differently. Some say the coat of many colors. Some say a coat with large sleeves. And of course, we have the Technicolor Dreamcoat idea. Whatever it was a special garment. It set Joseph apart from the other brothers. And again, they got pretty upset. They got pretty jealous. So much so that they decided to kill him, take care of him. But one of the brothers said, well, wait a minute. Rather than killing him, why don't we sell him off into slavery? Because that way we can get some money. And so they did. One day when they were out far away from the tents, a couple days' journey, they got Joseph, tied him up, and then spotted a caravan that was going by, and they sold him off to the people in that caravan that were traveling to Egypt. So Joseph ends up in Egypt, and he's imprisoned several times for various things, several other adventures, which we don't have time to go into here, but he was in jail for many years. And during that time, or after he'd been there several years, the Pharaoh began to have certain dreams. And the Pharaoh has dreamt that he was standing on the banks of the Nile, and 7 very healthy cows came out of the water. Very healthy, very alive. And they came up to the bank and began to eat the vegetation. And these 7 cows were followed by 7 other cows that came out of the Nile that were very lean, that were skinny, that looked mean. And the seven cows that came out of the Nile then ate the cows that were on the bank. Now the Pharaoh could not understand this dream. Asked all the people in his court, soothsayers, magicians, priests. Nobody could give him a very good explanation. And then one of the people of the court, a butler, remembered that Joseph had helped him when he was in prison. So they went to the Pharaoh and said, there's a Hebrew slave in prison who is very good at interpreting dreams. So Pharaoh called Joseph to the court, told him his dream. Joseph prayed on that dream and then told Pharaoh what the dream meant. He said, Pharaoh, what this dream means is that Egypt is going to experience 7 years of plenty, great harvests, a lot of flocks, everybody prosperous, happy. But those 7 years are going to be followed by 7 years of want, in which there's not going to be much food. People are going to be starving. There's going to be a famine. So you need to prepare for those 7 years of want. And the Pharaoh was just amazed at this interpretation of his of this dream. He turned to Joseph and he said, you are the one that's going to do this for me. You interpreted the dream. I'm going to put you in charge of everything in Egypt under me to get everything ready for these years of famine. And so it happened. The first 7 years were years of plenty. And Joseph constructed granaries and houses to keep the extra crops and set aside. And those 7 years were then followed by years of want, years where there was a famine, a drought. And this drought and this famine encompassed not just Egypt, but the whole area of that Near Eastern area. And it included the area in Canaan where Jacob, Joseph's father, lived with all these other brothers that he had and their entourage at that point, which was very numerous. And Jacob heard that there was grain to be had in Egypt if you could come and pay for it and take it back. So he called his sons and he said, I want you to go to Egypt with the carts and money and beg the Egyptians to sell you some of that grain. And so the brothers did. They went to Egypt with the carts. And they went in and they had to go in and prostrate themselves in front of Joseph. Now, they didn't recognize Joseph at that point. So many years had gone by. But Joseph recognized them. And so he began to ask them about their father and their other brothers that weren't there. And so he sold them some grain and actually put the money back in their sacks before they left. But he told them they had to come back with their other brother. And they did. They did come back. And they came back again to Egypt, prostrated themselves in front of Joseph. And Joseph was so moved with this, with his brother's appearance, that he actually wept And the Egyptians were surprised at this, his Egyptian servants. They said, he must feel very strongly about these people. And finally, Joseph could hold it back no longer. He went to his brothers, stepped down, and said, I am Joseph, your brother. Now, they could hardly believe this. They hadn't seen him for all these years. They thought he was dead. And here he was, this great high official in Egypt. And they wondered, what was it about him that he could be so good, so kind, so loving to them, so incredibly wonderful when they had treated him so poorly, sold him off into slavery, figured that he was going to be dead. And they said to him, why do you treat us so bad? We treated you so evil. We did so much evil to you. What caused this? And he turned to them and he said these wonderful words, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. My friends, we should emblazon these words on our mind, on our heart, and carry them with us, because they are words of great comfort. Because in everything that happens to us, every incident in our life, every circumstance, everything, what may have looked like disturbance, disease, heartbreak, hurt, God meant for good. God meant for good. Let's just take a moment. Just take a moment and close your eyes. And I just invite you to think back in your life to some moment when everything looked pretty bleak, pretty difficult, pretty tough, pretty confusing, whatever it was. And just know in that moment, as you look back on that, how things progressed, how things became better in your life, how there was a greater sense of God's presence. What seemed to have been meant for distress, for discomfort, for evil, if you want to put it that way, God meant for good. God meant for good. And this is the message of this story. What seemed to have been meant for that evil, and for us too, God meant for good. God means only good in our life. God wants only good in our life. God intends only good in our life. There's a wonderful passage in the Science of Mind, we call it the textbook by Ernest Holmes, who the founder of the Science of Mind, in which he answers this question, what is God's will for me? What is God's will for me? And he answers it by saying, anything that enables one to express more life, more happiness, more good, more joy, provided it hurts no one else, that is God's will for that person. Anything that enables us to express more life, more good, more joy, more happiness, that is God's will for us, as long as it hurts no one else, harms no one else. So when we say God meant it for good, this is the good that God meant. God means everything for good. The good of a blade of grass is to grow to be the best, most beautiful blade of grass that it can possibly be. We see this in nature all the time. So why wouldn't it be the same for us? It is the same for us. We need to take these words, as I say, and emblazon them on our heart, for they are words to live by. They are words that give us comfort and ease and assurance during those times when things get difficult. So the third story, I promised you 3 stories. The third story is a true story. It's about Viktor Frankel, who many of you probably know that name. He was this famous Viennese psychiatrist who, after the Second World War, wrote several books, Man's Search for Meaning and so on. And he was imprisoned by the Nazis early in their period, in the 30s. He was imprisoned at Dachau as a political prisoner and forced to labor in the fields. And this went on for years, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. He was out laboring in the fields. The only thing that gave him any kind of encouragement was the thought of his wife. He and his wife were deeply in love, and thoughts of her love for him and how it affected him were very encouraging to him and kept him going. Well, one day, he was discouraged. He was very downcast because he'd been in prison for a long time. He had not seen his wife. He had not heard from her. He didn't know if she was alive or dead, if she was near or far, wherever she was. And he was feeling pretty discouraged. The Nazi guards were pretty brutal that day. He was out digging in the fields. And towards sunset, he noticed afar off a light came on in a farmhouse. And when he looked up and saw that light, all of a sudden a bird flew down and landed in front of him, about 10 feet away. And the bird kind of cocked its head a few times and then flew off. And Viktor Frankl took this as a sign that his wife and their love was real, and it worked in him at that moment, and that the thoughts of her were there to encourage him, to enliven him, to keep him going, which he did. We all have signs like that in our life. They may not have been that dramatic, but they're all things that happen to us all the time. Whether it's a sign on the freeway, a piece of music, a phone call from a friend, somebody that says something to you, there are signs there that are available. There are signs there for us to listen to. There are signs to tell us that Spirit, God, is always available to us. Remember, what was meant for evil, God meant for good. So, from these three stories, what do we learn? We learn, first of all, from the little boy that you have to pay attention to the signs. Watch and read and understand, and if you don't understand or you have a difficulty, ask questions. Go to someone that can give you the answer. From Joseph, we learn that regardless of what's happening in your life, what difficulty, challenge, adversity, God meant it for good. There's a good present there. You have to grasp that thought and hold on to it regardless of what seems to be in front of you at that moment. And from Viktor Frankl, we learn that there are signs that help us in this thing called life. Signs that give us encouragement, that give us a sense that we do have that power, that presence within us that lives and moves and has its being as us. So let's take this moment and go into prayer. And what I know right now is that there is in each one of us that Spirit of the Divine that lives as each one here. It lives as all of our thoughts, all of our feelings, all of our emotions, all of our aspirations. We turn to it. We know that it truly is God's will for us being expressed in those things that we desire to do. We feel that presence as it lives in us all the time. What a beautiful thought this is, because it is one with us, it strengthens us, it enables us to go through all the challenges of daily life, knowing that we've got a source within that is who we are and that lives through us. It strengthens us It ennobles us. It enlivens us to participate to the fullest in this thing called life. So I speak a word for each one of us here, for all those aspirations that we carry in our heart, whether they have been voiced directly or explicitly or not, they are still carried within us in the deepest part of our being. We bless this moment. We bless everything that happens. We bless all that are around us, our families, our loved ones, our congregation here that supports us in all these activities. I bless this moment. I give thanks for the inspiration of this time, for I know it is truly God's work that we are all doing. Thank you, God. And so it is.